think it
ใช่ใช่
completely removes the association and you see it as unconcerned. Rather than like inhibited, you see a special presentation of the track. I think suspended, you don't see that. Have you checked out suspended tracks? It's not, I haven't seen it for years now.
ไม่แต่ว่าพี่ขี่ถึงไปพี่ก็อยู่เนี่ย
It's still the same.
แล้วก็เซ็ต
It's the black track.
There's just no list entry either, is
It doesn't actually, it just stays in the black, the full label in the black colour.
Yeah, so essentially this is manual and you have a list, this is automatic and there's no list because it's leaving your airspace and you expect to get messaging on it, you expect to receive an EST and that's what reactivates the flight when it comes back in.
And how about the safety net? The safety net
It's still eligible as a target for STCA. Otherwise, it's no RAM processing, no anything like that, because the flight's considered as not to be processed by the system. The last two states will be finished and then cancelled. And if you remember working in the system through the flight plan window, for example, when you finish a flight, it removes the track presentation from the screen, but it stays in the system for a VSP. So normally it's set to 5 minutes, but if you want to keep your flights alive in the system, because when you finish, remember that you can make a new from, for example, if you want to use it as a template. The downside is that when you've got flights finished, they still have an SSR code associated to them. So you can't reuse the code until you get rid of the flight. And you can't make another flight data record exactly the same until it's cancelled, which deletes the flight from the system. So there is really no cancelled state. Once you cancel it, the flight data record no longer exists in the system. It's moved out of the active
Jeff, what
state.
happened when you got the cancel message for the AFT? It's gonna be go to the finish or the cancel?
It should finish the flight and then it will cancel after that.
So that we will got the problem when the airline send the new flight plan.
Yep, straight away.
Normally they send the cancel message and then simultaneously they send the flight plan, the new flight plan.
Well, it should be okay if are they sending a new flight plan with exactly the same details, or
Maybe they change the type or they change some digit, just maybe the same type but the different aircraft.
so? Remember that when you have a state like that, you're relying on the key, the uniqueness of the flight plan. So it checks the departure, destination, the call sign, obviously, and the EOBT or the time on it. This, you can set a data set parameter that normally is set to 20 minutes. So you can have two flight data records with the same call sign, same departure, same destination, as long as the departure time is different by 20 minutes.
But normally they have the same thing, exactly the same thing, because maybe they just change the time.
Yeah, then that would be rejected as a duplicate flight plan. If they send a cancel, but we can check that to make sure. I believe it goes to finished before it goes to cancel, but we can check that. If you just give me a minute. Yeah, so the flight plan becomes finished when we receive a cancel message. So it's this one.
So that will cause a lot of economy to us in terms of the safety.
Yep.
Because most of the flight plan will come on
So what you would have to decide is how big do you want this time to be? Is there any benefit, like when you cancel a flight plan, is it acceptable to have it immediately go straight through from finished to cancelled? Because you can set the time. If we look at the minimum, we could set that time for. This is going to test me. just looking for
What's-
the minimum.
What's the difference in the time between the old flight and the new flight?
Maybe instantly because the most of the most of the airlines say airlines come like they cancel it, they send it.
I mean, the new flight plan has a difference in EOBT, does it? It's the exact same.
Because maybe they just change some part of the route or some.
แต่ทุกครั้งที่เราแคนเซิลมันก็แปลว่าเราจะต้องรีบ
Can't they send a change
ไฟล์
message
ใหม่เข้ามา
instead of a?
ถ้าแคนเซิลเสร็จก็ต้องไปไล่
Isn't that the whole idea
That
of a
would be
change
better.
message?
ขั้นตอนมันเยอะไง
That's the purpose of a change message is to change.
They not use the change message. They use the cancel the lot and then send the new flight.
Okay,
She
so
said that if you change the time, you cannot use the change message. You need to cancel the flight and then create a new one, the new flight.
so this can be set to 0,
ทันทีทันใดได้
Yeah.
and it's an A/B parameter. So you could specify that for one particular piece of airspace. It can use a B, which could be 0, and then an A could be 5 minutes, for example.
And can I define the B like a special event? If you have a cancel message, should be
No,
you just
it's
define with the aspect.
just A or B.
And what the A and B used for? You have to define the area that you would like.
Yeah, so every volume in the system you attribute as a type A or a type B volume.
โนซี ATA กับฟินิชมันคนละอย่างกันถามว่าถ้า ATA เมื่อไหร่แล้วก็ขึ้นก็แค่นั้นเอง
If we don't want to lose the ability to have the finish and cancel, how
ลูกค้าเรา
how
ซื้อ
can
ATA
I'm not sure. Maybe if we have like the special one, if we have the cancel message from the FTA, that would consider very valid, right? Can we go skip jump from the finish to the cancel?
No, all it will do is it will receive the cancel, it will look at what airspace does this aircraft finish in, and it will apply either A or B parameter. It doesn't have any smarts to work out a difference between the two. No, finish is still available.
It removes it from the screen. It's still in the FTP for the next amount of minutes. In case you want to refer
So,
back to it, you can still
Yeah,
call up the flight plan and see.
จากเราให้ ATA แล้วกี่นาทีมันเป็นสติมันจะเป็นผิดมันอันนี้มันจะเกี่ยวกับลูกค้า
เพราะเอาไปใช้ต่อ
แต่ถ้าเกิดเราฟินิช
โอเค
ใช้ที่เข้าไป
No, this is from so when it lands. So when
5 นาทีมีเวลาได้
so when the flight arrives at destination,
ก็ประมาณ5 นาที
it will stay on the screen. It'll go into
แต่
the
ว่าที่บาง
finish stage for X amount of minutes. I think you've got it set to 15 minutes. So it will actually sit on the screen for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, it goes into cancel state where it's deleted from the screen, but it's still available in the flight plan window for the next for reference.
Okay, so once a flight is decoupled, the flight data record itself will go from active to finished at this flight plan finish decouple parameter. That's
So your finish end is
so
15
that's a
minutes,
decouple, and then we have a finish end.
and your finish decouple is 5 minutes.
Yep. And so we also have this parameter, which is after the ETO on the last point in the flight data region, it will go from active to finished unless it's coupled, or if the decoupling occurred in the last this time. So this is really the more important one because it's to do with the ETA. So let's say that, what would you say, a destination? So let's say we have the estimate for the destination equals 0917. So because that's the estimate, let's say that the flight arrives over that point. Normally the system should attempt to finish it after what's finish n set to at the moment, 5 or 15 minutes. So currently you have this, and it's a dual parameter, so you can have two airspace values for this one as well. So if the track arrives over the destination, it should move from active to finished in 15 minutes. So that's what Jamie was saying, that the flight plan track could possibly hang around for 15 minutes, except if it remains coupled. So let's say that the aircraft arrives and then decides, oh, I'm going to do some circuits for half an hour. Even though it's already reached the ETO plus 15 minutes, because it's coupled, this one takes over and it will keep the flight alive in the system, and then eventually it will decouple. Once it decouples, it should keep the flight alive for whatever this parameter is, except if it's already well past this point. In that case, it will finish straight away. So it's designed to try and keep these flights, but for you guys, the practical one is this 15 minutes that will keep the flight alive when it arrives. And it goes, you can still see the flight on the screen. If you turn the shoebox off, you can access the flight data record. It will still be active. If it was to get airborne again, it would recouple, although you couldn't modify the route if it's already overflown the last point. So there's
คำว่าฟินิชเราที่ว่าฟินิชกับเป็นเส้นก็คนละพารามิเตอร์กันที่เขาตั้ง5 นาทีเราก็ควรจะตั้งเป็น0ได้ไม่มีผลอย่างเครื่องมีคนตายโอเคเราก็แคนเซิลแล้วก็ดีแคนเซิลก็แปลว่าให้มันดีลิทไปอัตโนมัติได้ปกติคือแคนเซิลเสร็จมันจะต้องรออีก5 นาทีมันถึงจะดีลิทไปจากระบบทีนี้ใส่ก็ใส่ซ้ำไม่ได้ถ้ามันลงปุ๊บดีลิทถ้ามันลงปุ๊บแล้วจับเอาไม่ได้จน15 มันฟินิชเสร็จว่าคนละเรื่องคิดว่าลงไปแล้วซึ่งค่ามันยังอยู่แก้มสูงลงก็สูงไม่รู้อยากจะให้มันฟินิชภายในเครื่องเลยมาถึงแล้ว5 นาทีคุณยังไม่ขึ้นอีกเนี่ยเราฟินิชเลยเราจะใส่ก็ใส่ไม่ได้ต้องรอ5 นาทีปัจจุบันพวกพารามิเตอร์ต่างๆจะต้องไปแคนเซิลด้วยแคนเซิลก็จับได้ต้องแคนเซิลไปฟินิชแล้วก็แคนเซิล2 ครั้งต้องทำ2 นาที
ตอนแรกแอน
แล้วมันสำคัญตรงที่ถ้าใช้แคนเซิล
ตัวเล็กๆที่มันจับ
แล้วไปหาภาษาที่ไม่เจอนะต้องไปฟินิชมันไม่มีโอกาสจะฟินิชมันได้เลย
ไม่ได้
ที่นอกจากจะต้องเข้าไปแคนเซิลในวินโดว์แคนเซิลเสร็จก็ต้องดูหน้าเดิมอีกทีแล้วก็ต้องไปฟินิชแคนเซิลฟินิชไหนมาก่อนฟินิชก่อนแคนเซิลมันไม่อยู่บนเวทีไอ้ที่แต่มันก็อาจจะมีวิ่งเลยก็ขอแบ็คเราวิ่งขึ้นมาเกิดใช้แผนที่เกิดขึ้นคือเป็นชื่อที่4 หรือ 5 นาทีฟินิชเมื่อไหร่ใส่เข้าซ้ายใหม่ได้ทันทีฟินิชไปเลย
And that was what that goes down to 0. If you change that to 0, if you hit delete on the flight or receive a cancel message, instantly all traces are completely gone from the system. Without looking at traces, you can't see any more information. At the moment it's 2 for your cancel change time. So
well,
it depends if you need to
depends. If you never access the flight, set it to 0 and it will kill it.
2 นาทีผมว่ามันนานกว่านั้นใช้ดีเซ็ตเป็น5เซ็ตเป็น2
This one is 2 at the moment.
ตอนนี้ finish to check to cancel
This is from cancel to delete.
Not cancel, you have to take 2 minutes.
2 minutes at the moment.
After the manual cancel. After the manual finish, you cancel.
Yeah, if you go and cancel, if if you cancel a flight now,
มันมีหลายสเตจ
you'll see it stay for 2 minutes.
finish to cancel how long finish to cancel 5 minutes and finish to delete
Finish to cancel in 15 minutes. You've got
finish to cancel 5 minutes finish to delete 2 minutes ทำไมถึงมีหน้าอันนี้
อีก15 minutes มาอีก
it's active. It lands at its destination. It goes into a finish state for 15 minutes. Then it goes into a cancelled state for 2 minutes, and then it's gone.
ไม่มีเลข5 finish to cancel คือ 15 หมายถึงว่าลงไปแล้วพี่ก็ยังมูแผนไหนได้ดี
จะมักจะ
เดี๋ยวนั้นจบไปแต่
Show one
2นี่คือ cancel ไป delete
แล้วก็กว่าจะไปก็2 นาที
พี่จะสร้างแผนใหม่พอไซด์เดิมใช่ไหม
ไม่คือเอาง่ายๆคือบนหน้าจอเรดาร์ผมขีดไฟแพนเข้าไปคอนไซน์อะไรครบเรียบร้อยแต่ผมใส่คอนไซน์ผิดตัวอย่างเงี้ยผมก็จะต้องไปฟินิชแล้วก็ไปดีลีทมันอันนี้ช่วงที่ฟินิชปุ๊บเนี่ยถ้าเราไม่ดีลีทมันทิ้งเนี่ยมันก็ต้องรอนานกว่าจะไปสร้างคอนไซน์เดิมนี่กับเข้าอีกนะมันสร้างใหม่ไม่ได้
He want to recreate the flight plan with the same course size. It take 2 minutes to create
It'll still
the
be there
new
to.
one. It's too delay for him. I think if we change it to be 0, will we have any effect? If we change it to be 0, any side effect?
Just that once it's deleted, it will go straight away. We can.
ลบแล้วหายเลยแค่นั้นนะจะเขียนได้เป็นศูนย์ของสุนทรภูมิเซ็ตเท่าไหร่
แล้วสติปของหอนี้ก็2 หางครับ
How about strip of EFS is still gone to or not?
I believe EFS. Once you delete a flight, once it's gone into the, it should go.
It deletes it from the EFS.
Yeah, straight away. Not. It won't retain it for
I think
the.
wherever it is,
It's
it
gone.
kills it.
ของสุวรรณภูมิเซ็ตไว้เท่าไหร่อะ
มัน
คะ
ก็คือว่ายกเลิก
ของสุวรรณภูมิเซ็ตไว้เท่าไหร่
ลบไปอยู่แล้ว
ค่าไอ้จากฟินิชเดี๋ยวนะค่าจาก
ไปลง
cancel ไป delete
ไปลงปุ๊บถ้าเกิดเราตั้งค่าไปนี้เป็น0แล้วโปรแกรม AT เมื่อไหร่ ก็จะหาย
ไม่
5
มันจะยังไม่ finish มันจะหลังจากลงไป15
ไม่
นา
เป็น
ที
ไร
มันถึงจะ finish อัต
เขา
โนมัติ
เขาสร้างแผนพอไซด์เดิมไม่ได้
ก็โอเคก็ตั้งได้สุด
ต้องรอ 5 นาที รอ 2 นาที อย่างสมมติสร้างคอไซซูโม่สมมติสร้างไปเสร็จ ปรากฏเปลี่ยนใจ ลบทิ้ง อาจจะกลับมาสร้างใหม่
พอผิดตัวไม่ใส่สร้างผิดตัว
อืม
ก็จะใช้คำว่าฟินิช
cancel 2 ทีลบ2 ครั้ง
ฟินิชแล้วก็ดีลีทใช่ไหมไปฟินถ้าเกิดฟินิชเสร็จนะครับ ถ้าเกิดเราไม่ไปเปิดไฟล์แผ่นวินโดว์เราจะไปหาคอนโซลตัวนี้ไม่เจอเลย เราจะไปดีลีทมันทิ้งไม่ได้ ต้องไปเปิดไฟล์แผ่นวินโดว์เพื่อจะฟินิชมันก่อนแล้ว
ไอ้วินโดว์ที่เป็นไฟล์อะ
อ่ะ
ใช้ได้แต่ไฟล์ไทยวินโดว์
มันจะค่อนข้างจะยุ่งยากในการที่จะไปดีลีทมันด้วย
ลองดูได้
ลบได้
เป็น
ไม่เป็นไร
ศูนย์
เป็นศูนย์เดี๋ยวสคริปต์เลเวล2หายหมด
ไม่เป็นไรไม่เป็นไร
ผมจำไม่ได้แต่ว่ามัน
นะ
น่าจะมันคนน่าจะเป็นคนละตัวกัน
เออ
เพราะมันอาราโง่เนี่ยก่อนจะไป finish อัตโนมัติเนี่ยมันใช้เวลา15 นาที
งั้นเดี๋ยว
เพราะฉะนั้นเรามีเวลาที่จะใช้เนี่ย15 นาที
พอเดี๋ยวเราโน้ตไว้ว่าอันนี้เราเซตเป็นศูนย์
แต่ถ้าเราเซตตรงนั้นเป็นศูนย์ก็คือพอ finish ก็คือหายไปเลยไม่ต้องไปลบมันอีก
Okay, cool. Alright, so let's try and put it into some practical application of how this now affects the position. So I'll try and depict this situation where we have a timeline with a flight departing at 1000. Now I'm sorry, it's very small. I've got a lot to kind of write on here, so we'll try and work with it. So flight departing 1000, and we're interested in its passage into sector A's airspace. It's not the departure sector, it's simply a sector. in the cross list of this flight. So what are the different parameters going to come into play? So the first one we've already discussed is preactive departure change time. Let's assume that we set that in the system to 30 minutes. Right, so if we're talking about the flight data state or the flight data record, if we look at another timeline down here, or a timeline of events, and this represents the flight data record state. So we know that the ETD is 10. If we say 30 minutes before that, here, 0930, we would say that this represents the pre-activation event for the flight plan. So before this time, it's inactive. After that time, it's pre-active. At some point, it will be coordinated. It goes to the coordinated state, but that's independent of timeline. That's a controller's action to make that flight into that state. So that's all good, but it's really, everything's centred around this ETD at the moment. Now, when it pre-activates, it calculates the cross-sector list, as we discussed, and it will work out the entry time into Sector A's airspace. So let's just say that that's 15 minutes for convenience, and so it's going to enter Sector A at 10:15. This becomes the critical time for Sector A. So if we now look at the sector state, which means how it's going to be presented to the operator, which across all of the positions, what are they going to see for the presentation of the data? So there's quite a few timings that will come in and will influence this. So we've got a it's the best place to put that. I'll wipe that off because we've already discussed that. It's going to be the online flight. No, we can do that. So I'll work with the same pre-active inbound change time, but this time our reference now becomes 10:15 for the flight. So if we look back the same parameter, FPL, pre-active, inbound, change, even though it's a departure aircraft, and let's, I don't know, what's that set to at the moment in the system? FPL, pre-active, inbound change time. Sixty minutes. All right, so that's currently set to 60. So what that means is that 60 minutes before 10:15, so at 09:15, there's a system event going to occur. But because this is happening before the flight goes from inactive, it actually can't occur at this time, so it will be forced to be delayed a little bit because we won't get the presentation until we have the flight activated in the system. So even though there's a slight mismatch in those times, this is actually when the event is going to occur. So before then, we would normally consider that that flight would be unconcerned, so it's going to be out here, it will be the grey colour, which means it's entering your airspace, but it's entering in the future. After we reach this time, we see that the flight will become entering your position. Here's where it's presented as black in your list if you're not the first cross position, essentially. There's a few other rules that go around there, but if we just look at for any sector, it will be black. Now, if you can imagine that you're sector B after this, So sector B, the entry point is here. And so now this becomes the reference point, and we look back, FPL preactive inbound change time from this sector. So let's say that he's getting here at 10:30, an hour before. That means for this sector, it would actually be at 09:30 that the flight becomes black. So here, technically, it would be 9:15. The next sector would be 9:30. The next sector, it might be 9:47, for example. So what you should see as a flight goes through all of the sectors, they will each go black at exactly the same time before the flight is due to enter their own sector. So if you look at a flight on here in the list, and it's black here in the entering list, it's only black for this sector. Okay? Another sector that's further down the road, it won't even be in a list yet because it's still not within the sector notification for that particular sector. After we have this one, and you can change that and it will affect every position, you then have sector inbound notification. And at the moment, in your data set, that will be set to something different. From memory, I think, what have you got it at, 30 minutes? Okay, so this is 30 minutes. And so we still apply it to the entry. So here, we'd say 30 minutes before, it will go from black to being green. And this is where you'll see the change in the HMI. So we've got the dark green ones here. They are within the sector inbound notification horizon. What about the bright green ones? What time controls the bright part of the green? It's not actually a time, it's an event. It's when you coordinate the flight, it will go into that state. So I could actually coordinate it when it's grey, or when it's black, or when it's dark green, and it will immediately go bright green because I've now jumped all of those states through to that presentation of the HMI. But if we're talking about controls, these are the two that are interesting. 60 minutes before your sector to go black, 30 minutes before your sector to go green, as long as you still have the flight pre-active in the system. If it's not yet pre-active, none of these events can occur because we're not managing the flight. So this explains why you go, well, hang on, we set this flight to 60 minutes, why can't I see it an hour before? Well, that might mean that your pre-activation event for the flight data record is wrong. You need to make it bigger so that you can then start to process these flights in the system. So we say that this is, from a sector perspective, this one is unconcerned. It's either not crossing my sector or it's not yet eligible to be black. It's not yet pre-active. Once it goes past this point, we say that it's sector inactive, which is a little bit odd because you say, but I can see it on the screen, it's black. Well, it's just considered to be inactive for your sector. Once it goes past this point and becomes green, then we say it's sector pre-active. And then after that point, once you actually assume it inside sector A, it becomes sector current. And all of this controls how the sector's actually, or how it's displayed on your position. And then after this point, once it leaves your sector, we see that it's sector exiting, and we're no longer interested in the flight. And that gives you yet another colour change, which is the one where it goes to that kind of crazy orange salmon colour when you hand over a flight out, and then eventually it goes grey again, which means it's now unconcerned again because it's left your sector by a certain amount of time. So these essentially are time driven to go from grey to black to dark green. It's all based on times and it's all individual for the sector. And then according to this becomes critical for who can do what to the flight. If you're uncontrolled, then there's restrictions on who can assume the flight, who can change the detail. If you're coordinated, you can't change the cleared flight level anymore. So this all impacts what you can actually access in the system. That's as far as I wanted to delve into the flight plan parameters. There's more complexity to there if you want to discuss, but is that enough information for what you want to do at the moment as far as tuning the times and things? I've got a better diagram that I can send you. Well, look, better's an arguable term. I've essentially got that I can send to you, or you can take a photo of that if you want. Yeah, I can absolutely send it to you. It's still a crappy hand-drawn diagram, but it's better than that.